My name is Dale Conway and I am 46 years old. 5 months ago, I stood at the back of a title company's conference room and watched a wealthy man named Preston Sturgis sign a check to me for $87,000, the exact amount he had spent 4 months swearing in front of anyone who would listen that he would never, ever pay. His hand was shaking when he signed it, not from age, but from fury, because signing that check was the only way he was going to be allowed to close on the sale of his house that afternoon. And he knew it, and I knew it. And his own lawyer had told him, in front of me, that there was no other way out. Preston Sturgis looked up at me over that check with pure hatred, and I just looked back at him calm as a Sunday, because I had learned something in those 4 months that Preston Sturgis, with all his money, had never had to learn. A rich man can refuse to pay you. He cannot refuse to sell his house, and I had quietly placed myself directly between him and the thing he wanted most. For 4 months, Preston Sturgis had refused to pay me the final $87,000 he owed on a job I completed to the letter, inventing complaints about workmanship that did not exist, threatening to bury my small business under lawyers and bad reviews, and betting, the way men like him always bet, that a working contractor with a crew to pay and a mortgage could not afford to fight back and would eventually just go away. He was not entirely wrong to bet that way. Most of us do go away. That is the whole business model of a man like Preston Sturgis. But here is the one thing he did not know, the thing he never bothered to find out, because he could not imagine that a man with dirt under his fingernails might understand something he did not. Every single day of that job, I had documented everything, and I understood the law that protects a builder who does that, a law older than Preston Sturgis's money and completely indifferent to it. He thought he was refusing to pay a contractor. He was actually attaching a legal chain to his own house, and the other end of that chain was in my hand. Before we get into this, if you are new here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And while you are here, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every one of them, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to my father's hands and the trade he put in mine, and to the day a man in a golf shirt drove up to my job site with a set of blueprints and a smile I should have read better. I grew up in Kettle Falls, a town of about 6,000 people in the river valley, where the granite comes up out of the ground like the land is showing you its bones. My father, Raymond Conway, was a stonemason, and his father before him, and there is a good chance that if you drove through half the towns in our county, you would put your hand on a wall my family built and never know it. My father laid stone for 44 years. He built chimneys and foundations, and retaining walls and the fronts of banks and churches, and he did it the way the old men did it, by eye and by feel, with a patience that I did not understand as a boy, and that I would give anything to have half of now. He used to say that stone does not lie. He meant that you cannot fake a wall. It is either plumb or it is not. It either drains or it does not. It either stands for 100 years or it comes down in 10, and there is no talking your way around what the stone does after you walk away. I did not know it then, but he was teaching me the thing that would one day save my whole business. He was teaching me that the work is the truth, and the truth is patient, and it always, always tells on you in the end. Let me give you one memory of my father, because it is the memory I came back to through this whole ordeal. When I was maybe 15, we were building a retaining wall for a man who was in a hurry and kept pushing my father to go faster, to skip the drainage gravel behind the wall, to just get it up. And my father, who never raised his voice, set down his trowel and said, "I can build it fast, or I can build it so it's still here when your grandchildren are old. I only know how to do the second one." The man grumbled, but my father built it his way with the drainage done right, hidden behind the stone where no one would ever see it or thank him for it. That wall is still there. I drove past it last year, 40 years on, straight and true and dry. My father spent his whole life doing the right thing in the places no one would ever look, because he believed the work itself was a kind of promise, and a man does not break a promise just because no one is watching. I built Preston Sturgis's walls the same way, every hidden thing done right, and it turned out that all those hidden right things, all those honest courses no one was supposed to have to look at again, were exactly what made his lies about my workmanship fall apart the moment anyone did look. I started carrying stone for my father when I was 13, and I never wanted to do anything else. I did a hitch in the trades, learning the wider building business, framing and concrete and the rest of it, and then I came home and started Conway Masonry and Construction, and I have run it now for 20 years. We are not a big outfit. In a good season I have a crew of 6-7 men, some of whom have been with me for 15 years, men I have stood beside in the rain pouring a footing, men whose kids call me uncle. That matters to this story, so hold on to it. My business is not just me. When a man like Preston Sturgis decides not to pay Conway Masonry, he is not sticking it to some faceless company. He is reaching into the grocery money of Marco, who has 3 kids, and Tommy, who is putting a daughter through nursing school, and my foreman Reuben, who has been with me since we were both young men. My father taught me that a man's crew is his responsibility, that you do right by the men who do right by you, and that is a debt I take more seriously than any other in my life. Preston Sturgis was about to teach me exactly how far I would go to protect it. Let me tell you about Reuben, because he is the heart of my crew, and he is part of why I could not just walk away. Reuben and I started together 20 years ago, 2 young men with more nerve than sense, and there is no man alive I trust more with a job or with my life. He has forgotten more about setting stone than most masons ever learn. Over the years he has turned down offers from bigger outfits for more money, and when I asked him once why he stayed, he shrugged and said, "Because you've never once lied to me, Dale, and you don't know how rare that is." That sentence has sat on me for years, because it means that every time I make a promise to that man, I'm spending the one thing he values most, which is his trust that Dale Conway does not lie and does not leave his people hanging. When Preston Sturgis stiffed me, the number that kept me up was not $87,000 in the abstract. It was the picture of me standing in front of Reuben and Marco and Tommy in a cold January, telling them I could not carry them through the winter because I had let a rich man rob us. I would have done almost anything to not have to have that conversation. Preston Sturgis was betting on exactly that. He just did not understand that the thing he was betting I would protect at all costs was the thing that made me impossible to beat, because a man protecting his people is a great deal more dangerous than a man protecting his pride. I married Angela, who runs the office side of the business and is the only reason any of the paperwork gets done right 22 years ago. We have 2 kids, a son in the trades already, and a daughter in her last year of high school. We do fine. We are not rich, and we are not poor, and we live in the house I mostly built myself over a lot of long weekends, and I have never once envied a man his money, which is important for you to understand, because this story is going to sound like it is about money, and it is not. It is about a rich man deciding that the rules that apply to everyone do not apply to him, and about what one working man with good records and a cool head can do about that. It is about my father's voice in my ear saying the work is the truth. Let me tell you how it started. Preston Sturgis came into my life about 1.5 years ago. He had bought a big property up on the ridge, one of those places with a view of the whole valley, and he was doing a major renovation and expansion, and part of it was an enormous stone and hardscape project, retaining walls, a terrace, a stone facade, an outdoor kitchen and fireplace, real work. The kind of stonework my family has been doing for 3 generations. He got my name because I am the man you get in that county when you want stone done right. He drove up to a job site where I was working, in a very nice truck, in a golf shirt and boots that had never seen a job, and he shook my hand and told me he had heard I was the best, and that he only wanted the best and that money was not an object for a man who understood quality. I have been in this trade a long time, and I will tell you now what I should have listened to then. When a client leads with how much he values quality and how money is no object, keep one hand on your wallet. The men who actually pay do not talk about it. They just pay. The ones who make a show of not caring about money are very often the ones already planning how not to give you any. But the job was a good job, a beautiful job, the kind of work a stonemason dreams about. And I wanted it. And Preston Sturgis was charming and flattering and seemed to have endless money, so I took it. And I want to be honest that my own pride was part of the hook. He was offering me the biggest, most prestigious stonework project of my career, and I wanted to build it. We signed a real contract, Angela made sure of that, a proper written contract with a scope of work and a payment schedule, deposits and progress payments, and a final payment on completion. The total with everything came to just over $200,000, the largest single contract Conway Masonry had ever signed. I remember Angela and I sitting at the kitchen table the night we got it, a little scared, a little proud, talking about what it would mean, maybe hiring another man, maybe finally getting the new truck. It felt like the job that would take us to the next level. In a way, I suppose it did, just not the way we imagined. The work began, and it went beautifully. And this is the part that still makes me angriest, because there was never anything wrong with the work. My crew and I built Preston Sturgis some of the finest stonework in the valley. I put my father's standards into every course of that stone. And here is the thing I did, the thing that is the whole spine of this story. And I did it not because I suspected Preston Sturgis, but because my father and Angela had drilled it into me for 20 years as simply the right way to run a job. I documented everything, every single day. I photographed the work at every stage, dated hundreds of photographs. When Preston Sturgis asked for changes, and he asked for many because men like him always do, I did not just say yes and shake his hand. Angela wrote up a change order for every single one, a written description of the additional work and the additional cost, and I did not lift a finger on any change until Preston Sturgis signed it. He signed dozens of them over the months. He signed them cheerfully, waving his hand. Money is no object, just make it beautiful, Dale. And every one of those signed change orders went into a folder in Angela's office, and every one of them was a link in a chain that Preston Sturgis was building around his own house without the faintest idea he was doing it. I want you to picture how ordinary it looked while it was happening, because that is the whole point. There was no drama to it. Sturgis would stroll out onto the terrace with his coffee while my crew worked, and he would say, "You know what, Dale, I think I want the fireplace 2 feet taller, and can we do a stone arch over the outdoor kitchen?" Wonderful, wonderful. And he would wave his hand the way rich men do when they are enjoying spending money in front of the help. And I would say, "Absolutely, Mr. Sturgis, I'll have Angela write that up." And he would say, of course, whatever you need," barely listening. And that afternoon, Angela would email him a change order, a plain document, additional work, additional cost. "Sign here." And he would sign it without reading it, because reading it was beneath him, because paperwork was for people like us, not people like him. He signed away his entire defense one careless afternoon at a time, 30 sometimes, always cheerful, always certain that the documents were just a formality that small. Careful people fussed over. My crew used to gently tease me about it. Angela and her endless change orders, Dale and his 1,000 photographs. I did it anyway, every day, because my father and Angela had made it a religion, not because I suspected anything. And that is the lesson underneath the lesson. I did not keep those records because I saw Preston Sturgis coming. I kept them because that is simply how an honest man runs an honest job, and it turned out that the honest habit, kept faithfully in the good times when it felt like a waste, was the exact thing standing ready when the bad time came. The changes drove the total up, the way changes do. By the time we were nearing completion, with all the signed change orders added in, Preston Sturgis owed Conway Masonry a final payment of $87,000 due on completion, per the contract he signed and per the change orders he signed. And we completed the work. We completed it beautifully, on scope, and it passed every inspection the county required, which is its own dated official third-party record that the work was done and done right. I sent Preston Sturgis the final invoice, $87,000, and I want to tell you that I did it with a full heart, proud of what we had built, expecting the same cheerful money-is-no-object handshake I had gotten for a year. That is not what I got. What I got was silence first. Then, after I followed up, I got an email, and I knew the moment I read it, the way you know a wall is out of plumb the moment you look at it. The email was from Preston Sturgis, but it did not sound like Preston Sturgis. It sounded like a lawyer. It expressed, in cold and careful language, his deep disappointment with the quality of the workmanship. It cited vague deficiencies, cracking that was not there, drainage concerns on walls I had built to drain 100 years, a general dissatisfaction that had never once been mentioned in a year of him standing on that terrace telling me it was the most beautiful work he had ever seen. And it concluded that, in light of these serious deficiencies, he would not be paying the final invoice, and that if I wished to pursue the matter, his attorneys were prepared to defend vigorously and to file counterclaims regarding the substandard work, and that he was confident a review of my company online and with the licensing board would reflect the true quality of my services. There it was, all of it, in one email. The invented complaints, the threat of lawyers, the threat to my reputation and my license, the whole playbook. I sat in Angela's office and I read that email 3 times, and I felt the floor drop out of my stomach, because $87,000 was not just my profit on that job, it was most of it, the margin that the whole year had been building toward. $87,000 was the new man I had hired, counting on staying hired. It was payroll for my crew through the slow winter months. It was Marco's grocery money and Tommy's daughter's tuition and Reuben's steady trust that Dale Conway would always do right by him. Losing it would not just hurt. It could genuinely break us, could mean layoffs, could mean going to the men who had given me 15 years of their working lives and telling them I could not keep them through the winter because a rich man on the ridge had decided not to pay. I understood, sitting in that office, exactly what Preston Sturgis was counting on. He was counting on that fear. He knew the math of a small contractor better than I gave him credit for. He knew that fighting him would cost me money I did not have, and time I could not spare, and that most men in my position, faced with lawyers and reputation threats and the slow bleed of a legal fight, would eventually just eat the loss and walk away. Because walking away, as terrible as it is cheaper than the fight. That is the business model. Stiff the contractor, threaten him, and wait for him to do the math and fold. It had probably worked for Preston Sturgis a dozen times. It was a very good bet. I want to tell you honestly about the night after that email, because these stories skip the fear, and the fear is the whole point. I did not sleep. I lay awake next to Angela running the terrible arithmetic, and around 3 in the morning I got up and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, in the house I built with my own hands. And I will tell you that a part of me, a big part, wanted to drive up that ridge at dawn and put my fist through Preston Sturgis's beautiful front door and drag him out onto the terrace my crew had built and make him look me in the eye. I am not a violent man. My father was not a violent man, but there is a particular rage that comes when a man with everything decides to take the bread out of the mouths of men who have nothing but their work, and I felt every ounce of it that night. And then, sometime before dawn, my father's voice came to me the way it does, and it did not say anything about fists. It said the work is the truth, and the truth is patient. And I sat there in the dark, and I started, slowly, to think instead of to burn. I want to stay in that dark kitchen with you a moment, because the choice I made there was the whole thing. And it is the choice this channel keeps coming back to for a reason. The rage was not wrong. I want to be clear about that. A man who feels nothing when a rich man robs his crew is not a better man. He is a colder one. The rage was right. What matters is what you do with it. And I sat there and I understood that everything my rage wanted me to do was exactly what Preston Sturgis needed me to do. If I threatened him, he had my threat in writing to wave at a judge. If I smeared him online, I was the unprofessional contractor his review had warned everyone about. If I put my fist through his door, I was a criminal, and he was a victim, and the $87,000 was the least of what I would lose. Every single thing the fire in me wanted was a door Preston Sturgis was holding open, hoping I would walk through it. So I did the hard thing. The thing my father did on that job site 40 years ago when the man told him to hurry. I set the trowel down. I let the rage become patience, which is not the same as letting it go, because I did not let it go. I aimed it. I took all that 3 in the morning fire, and I pointed it at the one thing that would actually work, which was the slow, cold, undeniable machinery of a properly filed lien, backed by a folder full of a rich man's own signature. Rage builds nothing. My father taught me that. But rage, cooled and aimed and made patient, will set a stone that outlasts the man who tried to break you. Because I realized that Preston Sturgis had made one enormous mistake, the same mistake rich men make over and over. He had assumed that because I worked with my hands, I did not understand the rules, and I understood the rules just fine. Here is what I understood sitting at that table. Preston Sturgis was betting that I would have to come to him, that I would have to chase him, sue him, beg for my money through a long and expensive process where his lawyers had every advantage. But there is a very old piece of law in this country, in every state in one form or another, built precisely for men like me and against men like him. It is called a mechanics lien or a construction line, and it exists for one reason, because for hundreds of years, working people have built things for wealthy people who then refuse to pay. And the law, in a rare fit of wisdom, decided that a builder who improves a man's property with his labor and materials has a claim against that very property until he is paid. Not a claim I have to chase him for. A claim that attaches to his house. A cloud on his title that does not go away until the debt is settled, that sits on the property like a lien on a car you still owe money on, that makes the house very difficult to sell, refinance, or borrow against. I did not have to drag Preston Sturgis anywhere. I just had to attach my unpaid claim to the one thing he could not pick up and move, which was his house on the ridge. And here is the piece that turned my fear into something almost like calm. A lien is only as good as your proof, because the property owner can always fight it, can claim the work was deficient, can tie it up. A lien filed by a contractor with sloppy records is a weak thing that a rich man's lawyers can chip away at for years. But a lien filed by a contractor who has a signed contract, dozens of signed change orders in the owner's own hand, hundreds of dated photographs of every stage of completed work, and past county inspections on the public record. That is not a weak thing. That is a chain-forged link by link over a year, every link signed by Preston Sturgis himself. His invented complaints about cracking and drainage would have to survive against my photographs and the county's own inspection records. His claim that the work was substandard would have to survive against the dozens of change orders where he cheerfully paid to add more of that very same work. Preston Sturgis had spent a year in his own handwriting building the case against himself, and he never knew it because he thought paperwork was for small people. So I did not send Preston Sturgis an angry reply. I did not threaten him back. I did not post a word online. Even as his own bad review of my company appeared, a review full of the same invented lies which I will come back to, because that review became the funniest part of the whole thing before the end. I said nothing. Instead, Angela and I went to a good construction attorney, not a fancy one, a practical one who did this kind of work all day long, and we laid the whole folder on his desk, the contract, the signed change orders, the hundreds of dated photos, the inspection records, the invoices, all of it in order. And I watched that attorney's eyebrows go up as he went through it, because he did not see records like that very often, and he told me so. He said, "Mr. Conway, most of the time when a contractor comes to me stiffed, we spend 6 months just trying to prove what the deal even was. You've handed me the whole case in a folder. This is about as clean as I have ever seen." And then he told me the thing that let me finally sleep. He said, "We're going to file a lien." And given this documentation, my honest advice to Mr. Sturgis, if I were his lawyer, would be to pay you, because he is going to lose. And it is going to cost him a great deal more than $87,000 to lose. We filed the lien. And now I need you to understand the piece of it that made it not just legal but decisive, the piece that turned a slow legal grind into a chokehold, and it is the piece Preston Sturgis never saw coming, because it required knowing something about him that he assumed a stonemason would never bother to learn. Filing the lien itself is not dramatic, and I want to be honest about that, because I do not want anyone hearing this to think it is as simple as being angry. There are rules and they are strict, and getting them wrong can sink the whole claim. There are deadlines, a certain number of days after the last work is done, within which the lien has to be recorded, and I was well within them. There is a specific form recorded at the county describing the property and the amount owed and the work performed. There are notice requirements letting the owner know. My attorney handled all of it precisely, because a lien filed carelessly is worse than no lien at all. It just hands the other side a technicality to throw it out on. This is why the documentation mattered so much, and why I keep coming back to it. The lien was the weapon, but my records were the ammunition, and a weapon without ammunition is just a threat. When my attorney recorded that lien, he attached a claim backed by a signed contract. 30-some signed change orders, hundreds of dated photographs, and past county inspections. It was, in his words, not the kind of lien a defendant beats. It was the kind a defendant pays. And the day it was recorded at the county, a public document now sitting on the title of Preston Sturgis's property for any buyer, any bank, any title company to see, I felt the balance of the whole thing shift. For 4 months, Preston Sturgis had held all the leverage, my fear, my payroll, my exhaustion. The day that lion recorded, the leverage moved, quietly and completely, into my hands, and it did it without me raising my voice or my fist even once. I had heard, through the trades the way you hear things, that Preston Sturgis was not planning to keep that house on the ridge. He was a flipper, a man who bought properties, renovated them lavishly with other people's unpaid labor, and sold them at an enormous profit. The whole reason he stiffed his contractors was that every dollar he did not pay us was a dollar of profit when he sold. And he already had the house on the market. He was at that very moment trying to sell the property for a great deal of money. And a sale like that requires clean title, and my lien meant the title was not clean. My $87,000 claim was now sitting on that house like a boulder in the doorway, and no buyer's bank was going to fund a purchase, and no title company was going to insure a sale until it was resolved. I had not chased Preston Sturgis at all. I had simply stepped quietly and lawfully directly between him and the sale that was the entire point of everything he had done. It did not take long after that. It never does once the leverage is real. The lien went on, and within a few weeks I got a very different kind of communication, not from Preston Sturgis this time, but from his attorney, and the tone had changed completely. The vigorous defense and the counterclaims about substandard work had quietly evaporated, because his attorney had by then seen my documentation and had surely told his client exactly what my attorney told me, that this was a fight he would lose slowly and expensively while his house sat unsellable. There was some initial posturing, an offer to settle for less, 40,000, then 60. The reflexive haggling of a man who cannot stop trying to win even as he loses. My attorney's answer, on my instruction, was the same each time, calm and immovable, the way my father was immovable when he knew a wall was plumb. We were owed $87,000 per the signed contract and the signed change orders. We would accept $87,000 plus the costs and interest the lien statute allowed, not a dollar less, and every week that Preston Sturgis spent haggling was another week his house sat frozen on the market. Another week the buyer he had lined up grew impatient. Another week the pressure he had tried to put on me pressed instead entirely on him. There is a justice in that reversal that I turned over in my mind many times during those weeks, a kind of poetry to it that my father would have appreciated. Preston Sturgis's entire strategy had been built on time and pressure. He would refuse to pay, and time would pass, and the pressure of unpaid bills and idle crews and a bleeding business would build and build on me until I cracked and settled for pennies or walked away. Time was his weapon, and the lien did something beautiful. It took his own weapon out of his hand and turned it around. Now every day that passed did not press on me, it pressed on him, because his money was tied up in a house he could not sell, and a flipper who cannot sell is a flipper bleeding money on a mortgage and carrying costs for a property that has become an anchor. The buyer he had, I heard, was getting nervous, threatening to walk, looking at other houses. Every day Preston Sturgis held out cost him more than it cost me, because I had already been paid for my patience by my father, decades ago, and Preston Sturgis was paying interest on his by the day. I did not have to do anything but hold still and let time, which he had meant to use against me, do its slow and certain work on him instead. That is the closing I began this story with. In the end, to save his sale, Preston Sturgis had to bring the money to the table. His buyer would not wait forever, and the only way to deliver clean title was to pay the lien in full. And so, 5 months ago, in a title company's conference room, Preston Sturgis sat down and wrote Conway Masonry a check for $87,000, plus the costs and interest, the entire amount he had sworn for 4 months he would never pay. and he did it because it was the price of being allowed to sell his house, and there was no version of the story where he got to keep both my money and his sale. He signed that check with his hand shaking in fury, and he looked up at me with hatred. And I want to tell you what I felt, because it was not what that younger man burning at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning expected to feel. I did not feel triumph, exactly. I felt my father. I felt like Raymond Conway's patient hands had reached through me and set one more course of stone exactly plumb. The work is the truth, and the truth is patient, and it had told on Preston Sturgis in the end, just like my father promised it always would. Now let me come back to that online review, because it is the part that still makes my crew laugh. In the middle of all this, Preston Sturgis had posted a long, furious review of Conway Masonry, full of his invented complaints about cracking and drainage and substandard work, trying to make good on his threat to ruin my reputation. And for about a day it worried me. But here is what happened, and it is a lesson in itself. My reputation in that valley was not built on the internet. It was built on 3 generations of walls that are still standing, on 20 years of doing right by people, on a crew of men who tell the truth about me in every diner and lumber yard in the county. When Preston Sturgis's review went up, the people who actually knew my work did not believe a word of it. And word went around the trades fast about what Sturgis had really done, stiffing a contractor and then trying to smear him. And the reputation that suffered, in the end, was not mine. It was his. Contractors talked to each other. After that, good luck to Preston Sturgis finding a quality crew in our county willing to work for him without full payment up front, because every one of them had heard the story. He tried to use his money and his lies to ruin the working man's good name, and instead, he taught every working man in the valley to see him coming. The stone does not lie. Neither, it turns out, does a valley full of tradesmen who have known each other for 30 years. I paid my crew through the winter. That is the sentence I care about most in this whole story. Marco's kids ate. Tommy's daughter stayed in nursing school. Reuben never had a moment's worry, and the new man I hired is still with me and is turning into a fine mason. Not one of my men ever knew how close it came, because doing right by them meant carrying that fear so they did not have to. There was one evening, months later after all of it was settled, when the crew was cleaning up at the end of a job, and Reuben came over and stood next to me while I loaded tools, and he said, out of nowhere, "That Sturgis business worked out all right then." I had never told him the half of it. I do not know how much he had picked up through the trades, but Reuben misses very little. I said, "It worked out." And he nodded, and he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "You'd have found a way to keep us on either way, I never doubted it." And he picked up a bucket and walked to the truck. And that was the whole conversation. But I stood there for a moment with my hands full of tools, and I thought, that is what the $87,000 was really for. Not the truck, not even the payroll exactly. It was for the right to keep being the man Reuben never doubted. Preston Sturgis tried to take that from me along with the money, tried to make me into a man who let his people down, and the thing I fought for, underneath the money, was the ability to look Reuben in the eye. I got to keep that. It was worth every sleepless night. The $87,000 is long since spent on payroll and materials and the ordinary business of keeping a good crew working, which is exactly what it was always for. And I did buy the new truck in the end. It has Conway Masonry and Construction on the door, the same as my father had on his. And I do not drive past a stiffed man's frozen house to think about Preston Sturgis. I drive to the next job, and I build it plumb, and I photograph it, and I have Angela write up every change order, the same as always, because the way you win against the next Preston Sturgis is decided long before you ever meet him. So let me leave you with what my father's trade taught me one more time, and then I will let you go. Men like Preston Sturgis are counting on a very specific thing. They are counting on you being too tired, too scared, and too broke to fight, and they are counting on you not understanding that the law, in a few old and beautiful places, was written precisely to protect the person who does the work from the person who refuses to pay for it. Do not eat the loss because the fight looks too big. Learn the rules that are already on your side. Keep your record so clean and so complete that your claim is not a weak thing they can chip away at, but a chain forged link by link, every link signed by the very man who owes you, and then do not chase them. Attach your truth to the one thing they cannot pick up and carry away and wait. Calm as a Sunday, because a rich man can always refuse to pay you, but he cannot refuse to sell his house. And sooner or later, he is going to need the very thing you are quietly standing in front of. My father built walls that will outlast every man in this story. He taught me that the work is the truth. Preston Sturgis learned it the hard way. With his hand shaking over a check he swore he would never sign. The stone does not lie, it never has. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. And tell me honestly, have you ever been stiffed for honest work? And did you fight for it, or did you let it go? I read every single comment, and I want to hear it. Take care of yourselves, do right by the people who do right by you, and I will see you in the next one.